The cabin was quiet, not peaceful, controlled. In first class, everything moves in a rhythm. Tray tables down, glasses filled before you ask, names remembered, smiles rehearsed. But then, a slap. Echoing. Not muffled by altitude or distance. Not a mistake. It landed with intention. Every head turned. She didn't scream. She didn't push back. She touched her face with one hand, and her pregnant belly with the other. The mark on her cheek was still forming, but the meaning? Immediate. Undeniable. No turbulence. No warning. Just a flight attendant, a hand, and a woman who had simply asked for water. The man in 2A stopped filming. He'd already captured what mattered. The hand in motion, the disbelief in her eyes, and the silence that followed. A silence so loud it made people look away. She was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that only comes when you've seen this before, when you know what happens if you raise your voice. And no one, not the woman who slapped her, not the passengers who said nothing, knew who she was. They didn't know the last name on her boarding pass. They didn't know what was waiting for her at the other end of the flight. They didn't know she could end careers with one phone call. But they were about to find out. Not because she shouted, not because she threatened, because power doesn't need to raise its voice. That seat in 3A didn't just belong to a pregnant black woman. It belonged to the wife of the man who signed the acquisition papers for the very airline they were flying on. The man whose name none of them recognized, but soon would. One hand across her face just changed the future of an entire company. Before we continue, pause for a moment. If you've ever watched someone suffer in silence while the world looked away, this story is for you. If you've ever been told to calm down, stay seated, or wait your turn, you're going to want to hear this. Drop a comment below with what country you're watching from. We read every one. And if you're someone who believes stories like this matter, subscribe, because some voices still go ignored. Not here. Back to the flight. The glasses were still clinking, the seatbelt sign was still on, but the air had shifted. Eyes avoided each other. The woman in 3A adjusted her belt, pressed her back against the seat, and stared out the window, jaw set, breathing steady. She hadn't raised her voice, but she had just issued a warning, and the one who struck her had no idea what she had just done. She thought she slapped a stranger. She slapped the owner's wife, and the plane hadn't even landed yet. She walked with purpose, but carefully. At 7 months pregnant, Jasmine Wilson moved a bit slower now, but there was no mistaking her presence. Her navy maternity dress fit like it was made just for her, sleek, professional, tailored. The kind of look that didn't beg for attention, but refused to be overlooked. She adjusted her tote over one shoulder, boarding pass in hand, and made her way to the jet bridge. First class. Seat 3A. A few heads turned, not with surprise, but with that look, that subtle scanning of her clothes, her face, her belly, and her skin. People don't always say what they think. But Jasmine had grown used to reading what they didn't say. A black woman in first class? Alone? Pregnant? People did the math in their heads, and the equations rarely made sense to them. She was 32, sharp as glass, and one of Chicago's most sought-after corporate attorneys. She just closed a litigation case that saved a tech conglomerate over $120 million. Her name was on law conference panels. She was who other attorneys called when the deal looked too complicated to save. Today's trip wasn't leisure. It was business. One last in-person meeting before maternity leave, a high-stakes negotiation she had prepared for with meticulous care, and she was going to win it. She approached the gate. "Ticket?" the gate agent asked without looking up. Jasmine offered it calmly. It was scanned. Beep. Approved. As she stepped forward, the agent spoke again. "Ma'am, ticket." Jasmine blinked. "You just scanned it." "Oh," the agent muttered, finally looking up. "Sorry, go ahead." She said nothing more. She didn't need to. That wasn't the first time she'd been asked for something she'd already provided. Inside the aircraft, the cabin was cool and hushed. Rows of wide leather seats, a few murmurs from passengers already settled. She stowed her bag, eased herself into seat 3A, and let out a quiet breath. This was supposed to be a smooth flight. 2 hours in the air. Touchdown in Chicago. Meet her client. Sign the papers. Return home to Elijah. Elijah Wilson. Her husband, her partner, her softest place to land. On paper, he was a tech entrepreneur. In reality, he was a genius who had spent years building the most advanced airline logistics software in the world, technology that now powered nearly half of North America's commercial aviation industry. Quiet by nature, Elijah had never chased the spotlight. He let the numbers speak for him. The last few months had been different, though. He'd quietly acquired Skylight Airlines through a discreet network of holding companies, leaving almost no public trace, no press releases, no headlines. Only a few executives knew. The deal had closed just yesterday. "I want to see how they run things when they don't know I'm watching," he told her. "Real change doesn't come from glossy brochures. It comes from what happens when no one's pretending." She had laughed, half joking. "You're sending me in as a secret shopper?" "Something like that," he smiled. "Except you're not just any shopper. You're my wife, and my son is on board too." She had kissed him goodbye that morning, smiling, stomach fluttering with more than just nerves. The baby had kicked so hard in the elevator, she'd laughed out loud. She rubbed her belly now, remembering. As more passengers boarded, Jasmine closed her eyes briefly. She didn't hear the flight attendant approach, but she felt it. "Ma'am," came the voice, flat, emotionless. "Ticket, please." She opened her eyes. "This is my seat, 3A. I already scanned at the gate." "I still need to see your boarding pass." Another request, another assumption, another moment that told her exactly how today was going to go. She handed it over, silent. The attendant glanced, nodded stiffly, then walked away. Jasmine leaned back in her seat. She wasn't surprised, not anymore, but she had no idea just how far this flight would go to test her patience, her dignity, and her safety. The first-class cabin began to fill, briefcases tucked away, jackets folded by attendants, conversations drifting in from across the aisle. Jasmine adjusted her seatbelt over her belly, letting her body sink slightly into the leather. Just 2 hours. That's all this was supposed to be. A moment later, a voice slid into the aisle. "Mr. Graham," the flight attendant beamed. "So wonderful to see you again." Victoria Hartwell. Blonde, polished, and poised like a brochure photo brought to life. Her uniform pressed so tightly not a thread dared wrinkle. Her smile rehearsed for exactly this kind of clientele. You could tell she knew most of these faces, and how to treat them. "Scottsdale was perfect," the man in 3B said, returning her warmth. "Shot under 80 for the first time. Thanks for the pro shop tip." "You're a natural," Victoria replied, laughing lightly, pouring him a glass of pre-flight champagne before his tray table was even down. Their exchange was warm, familiar, like a returning guest at a private club. Then Victoria turned. Her face didn't drop, but it shifted. The welcoming glow dimmed as she faced Jasmine. No greeting, no smile, no ma'am. Just procedure. "Would you like a beverage before takeoff?" she asked, flatly. "Water, please," Jasmine replied. "I need to take my prenatal vitamins." Victoria didn't answer. She simply turned and moved on. No acknowledgement, no warmth, just gone. Jasmine sat back, lips pressed together. She waited a minute, then 2, 5. No water. Across the aisle, Mr. Graham's glass was already being refilled. Jasmine pressed the call button. The light above her flicked on. Victoria passed once, twice. Both times she walked by without so much as a glance. Her hands were full, yes, but her eyes made no effort to register the request. Another 10 minutes passed. Jasmine tried again. Finally, Victoria stopped beside her. "Yes?" she asked, already reaching to shut the light off. "I haven't received my water," Jasmine said gently. "I need it for medication." "We're preparing for departure," Victoria said, clipped. "You'll need to wait until beverage service begins." Her tone made it sound like Jasmine had asked for something indulgent. Something beyond the rules. Not a basic request. Not something others were already receiving without delay. It wasn't about the water. Not really. It was about being made to wait. About being seen as less urgent, less deserving. It was a tone Jasmine had heard before. In boardrooms, in banks, even in maternity stores. Different faces, same undertone. She glanced around the cabin. No one else seemed to be waiting. Victoria moved on, back to Mr. Graham, her posture relaxing, her voice animated again. As if Jasmine's request had been an interruption, not a part of her job. The contrast was sharp enough to cut glass. And Jasmine wasn't imagining it. She had lived too much, seen too much, and risen through too many rooms where she wasn't expected to succeed, to second-guess what she was feeling now. This was familiar. Not new, just louder than usual. Even the glances she'd caught from other passengers, curious, skeptical, subtly questioning her presence in that seat, felt louder now. The uniform, the job title, the belly, none of it mattered. Not when the expectation is that you're out of place just for being there. Jasmine leaned her head back and exhaled slowly, hand resting on her stomach again. She told herself to stay calm. This wasn't the first time. But what she didn't know, what no one in that cabin knew, is that this time wouldn't end with silence and restraint. This time, the line would be crossed. Publicly, irreversibly. And all the polished smiles and cold courtesy in the world wouldn't be enough to undo what was coming. The plane had leveled out, seatbelt lights dimmed. Trays clicked open. The usual rhythm of a mid-flight routine settled into the first-class cabin. Except for Jasmine. She shifted slightly in her seat, trying to relieve the tightness in her lower abdomen. It had started as a dull pressure, something she might have ignored on a normal day. But it wasn't easing. It was building. She pressed the call button again. The light above her seat blinked politely, expectantly. Across the aisle, Mr. Graham was halfway through his second glass of champagne, now deep in casual conversation with Victoria, who laughed effortlessly at one of his anecdotes. Jasmine kept her posture straight, hands folded over her belly. Her call light remained on. Victoria passed by once more, eyes skimming over Jasmine like she wasn't there. Jasmine turned her head slowly, watching her move down the aisle, attending to passengers who hadn't asked for anything. This wasn't just inattentiveness. This was pointed. The ache in her lower back pulsed again, firmer now. A mild contraction. She recognized it. This wasn't her first pregnancy, and it certainly wasn't the first time her body had responded to stress. She adjusted in her seat again, one hand bracing against the armrest, the other resting on her belly as if to calm the child within her. He was moving, not panicked, just present, like he could feel what she was feeling, like he knew. She hit the call button again. Still, nothing. Rows behind her, a man lowered his camera from eye level. He had been watching, discreetly but closely. Derek Patterson, a photojournalist. Not paparazzi, not tabloid. His lens focused on the quiet things, the things most people pretend not to see. And he had seen this kind of thing before. He noticed the way Victoria's demeanor changed depending on who she was serving. He saw how Jasmine's requests, though respectful and clear, were dismissed like background noise. He noticed the contrast between customer service and compliance enforcement. He raised his camera again and began to document, not just what was being said, but what wasn't. Jasmine took a deeper breath. Another contraction came, slightly sharper. Still manageable, but too close to ignore now. She checked the clock on the screen in front of her. 10 minutes since her first call. Still no water, still no Tylenol, still no one had asked if she was all right. She wasn't being overlooked. She was being avoided. She tried to flag Victoria once more as she passed with a tray of drinks. "I need some water, and if possible, a Tylenol," she said calmly, but more firmly this time. "I'm experiencing some discomfort." Victoria didn't stop walking. "Beverage service will start soon," she muttered over her shoulder. "Please," Jasmine added, "I'm 7 months pregnant. I'm having contractions." Victoria stopped mid-step, just long enough to glance over her shoulder. Her expression didn't change. Everyone has to wait their turn. Then she walked away. Jasmine stared at the back of her uniform as she moved down the aisle. This wasn't forgetfulness. It was a decision. The pressure in her belly tightened again, this time sharp enough to make her grip the armrest. She closed her eyes and counted her breath. Across the aisle, someone shifted in their seat. Eyes met hers for a second, then darted away. Even here, in first class, even with her achievements, her dignity, her obvious condition, she was being treated like she didn't belong, like she had broken some unspoken rule by expecting to be cared for. Another contraction, shorter space between them now. She pressed the call button once more. The light blinked again. Still no response. From the corner of her eye, she saw the man in 2D lower his camera again. His brow furrowed, not just at what was happening, but at how normalized it seemed to be. Everyone had seen it, but no one said a word. And Jasmine? She was starting to realize she wasn't just being neglected. She was being erased. And in that cabin, 35,000 feet in the air, where comfort is sold as status and service as a luxury, she was being denied both. Not because they couldn't help her, but because they chose not to. Another wave rolled through her abdomen, sharper this time. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She shifted again, trying to relieve the pressure, but it only made things worse. These weren't just mild contractions anymore. They were getting closer together, tighter and harder to ignore. She looked at the blinking call light above her seat, still unanswered. 20 minutes. That's how long it had been since she first asked for water. 30, if she counted from when Victoria first pretended not to see her. She glanced toward the galley. Victoria was nowhere in sight. Another contraction gripped her. Jasmine inhaled through her nose, exhaled slowly the way her OB taught her. But the pain left behind something else. Resolve. She couldn't wait any longer. This wasn't about policy or beverage service or waiting her turn. This was her body trying to protect her child. And the person who was supposed to assist her had refused. Repeatedly, visibly, and deliberately. With one hand bracing her stomach and the other pressing gently against the armrest, Jasmine reached for her seatbelt and slowly unlatched it. The cabin lights were low, the seatbelt sign still on from mild turbulence a few minutes earlier. She stood. A few heads turned. Not many, but enough. As Jasmine steadied herself, Victoria appeared from the galley as if summoned. Her voice sliced across the cabin, loud and sharp. "Ma'am, the seatbelt sign is on. You need to sit down immediately." The tone wasn't concerned. It wasn't professional. It was performative, like she was scolding a child in public, deliberately loud enough for everyone to hear. Jasmine stood her ground. "I've been asking for assistance for nearly half an hour," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm in my 3rd trimester. I need water and pain relievers. I think I'm having contractions. You were told to remain seated. That applies to everyone." Her words rang with emphasis. Everyone. The kind of word that always carries weight when it's used to hide discrimination behind a policy. Jasmine steadied herself. "This is a medical need. You're disrupting the cabin," Victoria shot back. "If you don't comply, I will be forced to report this as a safety incident." That was when the cabin went silent. Even the man across the aisle, who'd been pretending not to hear everything, paused, fingers frozen over his keyboard. Jasmine stared at Victoria. "I am not disrupting anything. I am asking for help." Victoria stepped closer. "You people always think the rules don't apply to you," she said under her breath, but just loud enough. The phrase landed like a slap before the real one ever came. Jasmine blinked slowly, refusing to let her face betray the insult. "I'm going to the restroom," she said, voice steady. "Then I will sit back down." "You do that," Victoria snapped. "But don't think we won't document this." From the back rows, Derek raised his camera again. He hadn't moved since the first call button went ignored. But now, he pressed record. Not just for the sake of documentation, but because he had seen what happened when moments like this went unrecorded. He knew what silence protected. Jasmine turned toward the aisle. Another contraction rolled in. She gritted her teeth but didn't stop. Behind her, Victoria watched, arms crossed, that face hardening with something beyond annoyance. Control, disrespect, contempt, and a cabin full of people watched as a visibly pregnant black woman was spoken to like a threat. But Jasmine wasn't threatening anyone. She wasn't loud. She wasn't confrontational. She was just trying to protect her baby. And in this moment, she had to stand alone. But what no one could see yet was that she wasn't powerless. Not even close. The moment hung in the air, thick, tense, waiting. Jasmine hadn't moved. She stood in the aisle, her hands still resting on her belly, the other gripping the top of her seat for balance. Her voice had been calm, controlled. Her body was visibly in pain, but her presence? Steady. Victoria didn't like that. She stepped closer again, her face tight with irritation masked as professionalism. Her tone was loud enough now for everyone to hear. "You're being disruptive. If you don't sit down immediately, I'll have to treat this as a passenger disturbance." "I'm having contractions," Jasmine replied. "I've been trying to get help for over 30 minutes. All I asked for was water, Tylenol, a basic response." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "You people always think you deserve special treatment." The phrase struck harder than the rising pain in Jasmine's abdomen. "You people." The cabin held its breath. Someone near the back muttered, "Whoa," under their breath. Others sat perfectly still, pretending not to hear. But Jasmine heard it. All of it. Still, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't move an inch. Her stare held firm. "What did you just say?" she asked softly. Victoria took another step, too close. She was inches away now, towering, challenging. "I said, sit down," she snapped. And then it happened. A fast, open-palmed motion, so quick most people only registered the sound before they understood the cause. Crack. The slap landed across Jasmine's cheek with startling force. The sound rang out like something had broken. A glass, a rule, a mask. Time paused. Jasmine's head turned slightly from the impact, her hair shifting as she caught herself against the seat. Her hand flew to her face, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with disbelief. A red mark was already blooming on her dark skin, angry and raw. She didn't speak. She didn't gasp. She didn't reach back. She stood still, her hand on her cheek, her other hand resting protectively over her belly. And then, slowly, she looked up, straight into Victoria's face. The flight attendant's chest rose and fell quickly, adrenaline burning through her posture. But there was something else now. A flicker behind her eyes. Regret, maybe, but pride too. The kind that thrives in the false confidence of impunity. Across the aisle, Derek's camera was already rolling. He had captured every second, her tone, her posture, the slap, the silence that followed. The lens didn't shake. The red recording light blinked like a witness refusing to look away. Someone gasped from a few rows back. Others leaned into their seats, unsure what to do, unsure what they were even allowed to do. And Jasmine? She didn't crumble. Her fingers gently rubbed the place where she had been struck. Her mouth was closed, her eyes steady. She didn't cry. She just stood there. The silence in the cabin was louder than the slap, louder than the engines outside, louder than anything Victoria could have said next. But still, she tried. "She got out of her seat," Victoria said loudly. "She approached me aggressively. You all saw it. I was defending myself. It wasn't just a lie. It was a calculated reversal of truth, a script too familiar, too rehearsed." Derek didn't let it slide. "That's not what happened," he said, standing slowly from his seat. "You slapped a pregnant woman who asked for help. I've got it all on camera." Victoria turned to him, startled. Her mouth opened to respond, but then the intercom crackled overhead. "This is your captain," a voice announced. "Due to a developing situation in the cabin, we'll be making an unscheduled landing in Pittsburgh. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants, secure the cabin for arrival." The words sank in. A diverted flight, a public incident, and a woman in 3A, quietly returning to her seat, her cheek burning, her contractions still pulsing, and a growing storm behind her calm eyes. She hadn't been loud, she hadn't been angry, and yet she'd just become the center of a story no airline could bury. The captain's voice faded, but the words hung thick in the air. Unscheduled landing, secure the cabin. Everyone knew what that meant, but no one knew how far it would go. Victoria didn't look rattled. Not anymore. Her shoulders squared, her tone returned to formality, and she began her calculated retreat. She walked toward the front galley, adjusting her uniform with clipped motions like nothing had happened. Her voice lowered, private now, as she leaned into the cockpit, no doubt giving her version of events before anyone else could speak. Jasmine remained in her seat, silent, composed. Her cheek still stung, but she didn't touch it again. She sat with her spine straight, both hands on her belly, her head high. She wasn't shrinking, but the pain in her abdomen hadn't gone away either. The contractions hadn't stopped. Still, she refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her falter. Across the aisle, Derek sat with his camera in his lap. He'd recorded it all, but even he could feel the temperature shift. The other passengers avoided looking at her now. Heads down, eyes glued to screens. One man suddenly decided to sleep. A woman fumbled with a magazine she hadn't read all flight. No one wanted to be involved. And Victoria? She moved up and down the aisle with a polished efficiency, pretending nothing had happened. Except now, her glances toward Jasmine were loaded, with a smugness that said, "I'm in control again." Jasmine pressed her lips together, not out of fear, out of principle. She wasn't about to explain herself mid-air. Not to someone who had already decided what kind of woman she was before hearing her speak. The captain didn't say anything else. The flight attendants prepared the cabin with forced cheerfulness, reminding passengers to stow their belongings and raise their tray tables, as if everything was normal. But it wasn't normal. A woman had been slapped, and the one who slapped her was still walking the aisle like she owned it. The landing was rough, abrupt, like even the wheels were protesting. As the plane rolled to a stop on a quiet stretch of tarmac, nowhere near the main terminal, flashing lights became visible outside the windows. Police cars, airport security vehicles. A set of stairs wheeled toward the door like something out of a protocol no one ever thought they'd see in first class. The cabin stayed silent. Victoria stood near the exit, smoothing her hair and waiting for the knock. When it came, she opened the door with a rehearsed expression of concern. Two uniformed officers stepped aboard. One of them leaned into the cockpit briefly. The other scanned the cabin with a neutral expression, then turned to Victoria. "That's her," Victoria said quickly, pointing directly at Jasmine. She became combative when asked to follow safety procedures. She refused to sit, escalated the situation. "She struck me." The lie cut through the quiet like broken glass. Derek's hand twitched near his camera again, but Jasmine didn't move. She kept her eyes on the officer who approached, his face unreadable. The other positioned himself in the aisle beside her seat, blocking her exit. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "we need to ask you to step off the aircraft." Jasmine blinked. "Am I being detained? We just need to sort things out." "Did anyone ask for my version of what happened?" Silence. She glanced around the cabin. Row after row of faces turned away, staring into phones, looking out windows. One man twisted his wedding ring. Another flipped through the safety card. All those witnesses. Not one voice. "Until I saw what happened," Derek said, standing slowly. "She didn't touch anyone. She asked for help. She was slapped. I have video." The officer turned to him. "Sir, we'll take your statement later. Please remain seated." Derek didn't sit. "Are you really doing this? You're removing a pregnant woman based on hearsay? In front of all these people?" Still, nothing. Jasmine exhaled once, slow and steady. She reached down, picked up her bag, and stood without another word. She didn't look at Victoria as she walked toward the exit. She didn't look at the passengers who refused to meet her gaze. But the heat of humiliation followed her like a second shadow. Not because of what she'd done, but because of how many people chose to say nothing at all. The air outside the plane was colder. Jasmine felt it cut through her thin dress the moment she stepped onto the tarmac. No terminal, no gate, just flashing lights and the low murmur of radios and boots on pavement. Two officers flanked her, one slightly ahead, the other just behind. Not a word was said during the walk. No questions, no empathy, just protocol, as if she had committed a crime, rather than been struck midair by someone paid to assist her. Instead of being led through the terminal with other passengers, she was directed down a side stairwell, through a heavy security door, and into a back corridor lit with buzzing overhead panels. The walls were beige, windowless, sterile. A small room waited at the end, metal chair, gray table bolted to the floor. One camera in the ceiling corner, its red light glowing. "This won't take long," one of the officers said, gesturing her inside. They took her purse, her phone. They didn't tell her why, just said it was procedure. The door closed behind her with a mechanical click. Locked. She sat slowly, grimacing as another contraction pulled across her abdomen like a tightening cord. She closed her eyes, counted her breath, rubbed her belly. No one had offered her water. No one asked if she was in pain, and inside this room, no one even acknowledged that she was pregnant. She reached instinctively for her phone to call Elijah, then remembered it was gone. Time passed, minutes blurred. Still, no one returned. She rested her hand on her stomach. Her baby was still moving, thank God. She whispered to him gently, reassuringly. "It's okay. Daddy's gonna figure this out." She believed that. She had to. What she didn't know was that her phone, now sitting in a plastic bin outside the door, had already started lighting up. Missed calls, texts, notifications, because far from this room, someone was already moving. Elijah Wilson was reviewing a product roadmap when the first alert came in. Flight diverted. Unscheduled landing, Flight 218, Pittsburgh. His heart skipped. Jasmine's flight. He checked the flight app again to confirm. The time. The route. Something wasn't right. Seconds later, the call came. Not from the airline, but from an alert system tied to his private monitoring team. A soft flag notification triggered any time his wife's itinerary deviated from schedule. That flag had just gone red. He didn't panic. That wasn't his nature. Instead, he stood, walked to his home office, and opened a secured channel. Within 10 minutes, 3 people were on screen. his legal counsel, his VP of operations, and a senior advisor who helped him acquire Skylight Airlines just days earlier. "I need clarity," Elijah said, voice even. "Flight 218 was diverted. My wife was on board. I want a report, and I want it now." They scrambled. Within moments, Elijah was reviewing incident logs, partial, sanitized. A vague note about a passenger disruption in first class. A female passenger removed for non-compliance. No mention of names, no mention of a slap, no mention of what actually happened. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply said, "Pull internal crew rosters, gate logs, cabin crew profiles. I want everything on who was on that flight, and I want a statement drafted, not for the press, for the board." The Skylight team still didn't know who Jasmine was. They didn't know that the woman they'd had removed, detained, and disrespected wasn't just a random traveler with a problem. They didn't know she was married to the man whose signature finalized the deal that now made him the majority owner of their entire airline. But they were about to find out. And by the time they did, it wouldn't be damage control. It would be reckoning. The moment Elijah Wilson stepped into his private elevator, the gravity of the situation tightened around him like a cord. His face remained composed, but his mind was racing through data points, legal frameworks, and the many layers of ownership agreements that placed him squarely at the top of the Skylight Airlines food chain. He had acquired the company quietly, strategically. Skylight was America's third largest carrier, known for its vast network but troubled service history. And Elijah had bought it for one reason: to reform it. To show what leadership looked like when accountability wasn't optional. But now, his wife, 7 months pregnant, was in a holding room somewhere in Pittsburgh International, humiliated, bruised, and being treated like a threat. And no one at the company had realized who they were dealing with. Yet, he entered his office and activated the encrypted channel only used for high-risk operations. The team on the screen appeared within seconds. Senior Counsel Amelia Dorsey, COO Greg Lynn, and PR Chief Layla Stone. No one spoke first. They could all tell by Elijah's face that this was not a drill. "Flight 218, my wife Jasmine was on board," he began. "She was removed without cause after being assaulted by one of our senior attendants." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His clarity cut sharper than shouting ever could. Amelia immediately opened the incident log. "We have a partial report. It says there was an altercation involving a passenger who failed to comply with flight staff directives." The name wasn't flagged. Elijah nodded once. Of course it wasn't. That passenger was Jasmine Wilson. Layla froze. "Your wife?" She was struck across the face after being ignored for over 30 minutes while requesting medical assistance. She's now sitting in a locked room with no water, no phone, and no access to counsel. She is 7 months pregnant. The silence on the call was deafening. "I want the plane's cabin camera footage. I want the black box voice logs. I want the name of every crew member on that flight. And I want Victoria Hartwell's badge number on my desk in 10 minutes. Greg Lynn jumped in. "Sir, if we escalate this too quickly." "This is an escalation," Elijah interrupted. "This is a correction." Within moments, emails and internal pings lit up Skylight's executive dashboard. Amelia contacted legal counsel at the Pittsburgh Airport Authority. Greg looped in human resources for emergency suspension protocols. Layla contacted the airline's crisis comms team and issued a freeze on all outbound press activity. Elijah leaned back in his chair for a moment. His hands were still, his posture unshaken, but every second that passed was a war between restraint and fury. He pulled up the Skylight internal communication portal. As owner and chairman, he rarely used his override login, but now he did. He composed a short internal message. "To all Skylight senior leadership, effective immediately, Flight 218 is under executive review. No external statements are to be made. No actions are to be taken without direct authorization from my office. Elijah Wilson." He sent it. Then, without hesitation, he picked up his secure line. "Get her out of that room," he said to Amelia. "Now." Inside the small, windowless room at Pittsburgh International, Jasmine sat with her arms folded lightly over her belly, eyes closed. The pain had dulled, but it hadn't passed. The stress, the insult, the quiet ache in her side, it all lingered like residue. The door finally opened. 2 officers stepped aside as a new figure entered, corporate, polished, and unprepared. His name was Thomas Whitfield, Vice President of Customer Relations. His smile was mechanical, his tone rehearsed. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, "I want to extend my deepest apologies on behalf of Skylight Airlines for the situation you've experienced. I assure you this is not who we are as a company." Jasmine didn't speak. She simply looked at him. Thomas cleared his throat. "Your husband has been in touch. Arrangements have been made to release you immediately. Transportation is waiting. Water and medical staff are on standby. She raised her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Where is Victoria Hartwell?" He paused. "She's being placed on administrative leave while we conduct a formal review." "Not good enough." Thomas stiffened. "We're following standard disciplinary protocol." Jasmine stood slowly. "Your protocol left me locked in a room while the woman who struck me kept serving drinks in the sky." He said nothing. He couldn't. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her very presence was enough to unearth the weight of what had been done. Outside, security escorted her to a black SUV. A private physician awaited her at a downtown suite booked by Elijah. Within 30 minutes, she was receiving care. Meanwhile, Derek Patterson uploaded his footage. The moment of the slap, Victoria's exact words, Jasmine's calm refusal to retaliate, the cabin's silence, all of it, unedited. And it caught fire. By the time Jasmine left the hospital, the video had crossed 4 million views. Hashtags trended globally. Justice for 3A, she was pregnant, Sky slap. Journalists flooded Skylight's PR inbox. Civil rights lawyers began weighing in. Activists posted breakdowns of the silence inside that cabin. Airline unions scrambled to prepare statements. And then Elijah made his move. He published a formal letter on Skylight's website. "Yesterday, my wife, Jasmine Wilson, was assaulted while flying on an airline I own. She was denied medical assistance, misrepresented to authorities, and detained, while the person responsible was protected. This will not be brushed aside. Skylight Airlines belongs to a new leadership. Effective immediately, we will initiate a full audit of our employee training systems, our internal misconduct protocols, and our cultural competency standards. Change isn't optional. It's overdue." Signed, Elijah A. Wilson, Chairman and CEO, Skylight Holdings. The company stock dropped by 3% within 2 hours, rattled not by scandal laugh but by the reality that someone at the top had finally decided to clean house. Victoria Hartwell was suspended without pay pending investigation. Jasmine declined media requests. She didn't need to speak. The footage, the silence, and the public response had spoken for her. But deep inside Skylight's boardrooms, the message was clear. This wasn't just a public relations crisis. This was a reckoning, and they were just at the beginning. 3 days after the flight, Jasmine sat in her kitchen surrounded by quiet. Not silence. The baby was moving, soft music played in the background, and the kettle occasionally hissed, but stillness. The kind that comes after chaos, the kind that lets you breathe. She wasn't healed. Not completely. Her cheeks still held the faint shadow of a bruise, and her body still carried the tension of those long hours in the air, in that locked room, in the glare of a world finally watching. But she was home. Elijah had insisted she rest, and for once, she agreed. Her hospital checkup confirmed the baby was healthy. No signs of preterm labor. Still, every flutter inside her felt like a small miracle, a reminder of what could have gone wrong. The legal team had moved fast, too fast for Skylight's board to keep up. Depositions were scheduled. FOIA requests were submitted. A dozen civil rights attorneys from 3 different states had reached out offering support. What had been done to her on Flight 218 was no longer a personal violation. It was a national conversation. But Jasmine didn't want revenge. She wanted restoration. So she told the lawyers, "Don't just go after Victoria. Go after the system that protected her. Go after the policies that kept passengers quiet, that made employees think silence would save them. Go after the entire ladder of indifference." Inside Skylight, the house cleaning had begun. HR departments were audited. Employee training was paused and rewritten from the ground up. Every senior executive had to complete cultural accountability training, not just modules, but live sessions with civil rights consultants. Elijah didn't stop there. He replaced 2 board members, created a whistleblower protection clause that extended to passengers, and mandated that every complaint involving discrimination, verbal or physical, be escalated directly to the Office of Ethics, which now reported to him, not HR. This wasn't for show. It was correction. reconstruction. Still, Jasmine kept her distance from the media. She didn't want to become a symbol. She just wanted to live, to be a mother, to keep her son safe. But the letters kept coming, handwritten notes, emails, DMs, stories from strangers, mostly women, many black, some not, who had sat quietly in their own 3As and had been denied, humiliated, overlooked. One read, "I wasn't pregnant, I was just tired. But when I asked for help, they acted like I was a threat. Watching what you went through, it made me feel seen." Another, "Thank you for staying calm. You didn't have to, but you did, and now people are finally listening." That one stuck with her, because she hadn't stayed calm to be a hero. She'd done it to survive, to protect her child, to protect herself. Still, something was happening. This story, her story, had broken through the noise. And now she had a choice: retreat into healing or let that healing carry others forward. 6 weeks later, Jasmine stood before a small crowd in a glass-walled conference room in downtown Chicago. No media, no stage, just real people seated in a circle, holding stories in their laps like fragile glass. She cleared her throat. "Thank you for being here. I know what it takes to speak." This wasn't a press conference. It was the first roundtable hosted by the new foundation she and Elijah had launched, Skybench, an initiative focused on racial equity, advocacy, and passenger rights in commercial travel. It wasn't about diversity training or slogans. It was built to monitor how airlines treated passengers across race, gender, ability, and language, to provide legal pathways, to elevate unheard stories, and most importantly, to make sure that silence on planes never protected violence again. Jasmine walked past the conference glass wall. In the hallway were photos, images of real people who had submitted their stories, QR codes linked to anonymized testimonials. Some featured subtle mistreatment, others told stories of trauma no one believed until now. And it was working. 3 other airlines, nervous under public pressure, had reached out to explore partnerships. The Department of Transportation had requested to review Skybench's passenger equity survey model. And a bipartisan group in Congress had proposed legislation requiring a passenger Bill of Rights to include racial discrimination clauses. Meanwhile, Skylight was still reeling. Victoria Hartwell's termination had been finalized after overwhelming evidence and video corroboration. She was no longer in the airline industry. Her union had withdrawn support, and her personal statement, an unconvincing apology laced with legal padding, only worsened public perception. Skylight now faced 4 separate lawsuits, 1 from Jasmine and 3 from former employees who stepped forward after her case gained traction. All of them cited racial bias. All of them had receipts. And yet, this wasn't a victory tour for Jasmine. She spent her days reviewing policy drafts, preparing for childbirth, and holding space for survivors. The child she carried had kicked during every major development, every hearing, every board meeting. He was arriving soon. She could feel it. Elijah stood beside her every step, quiet, thoughtful, focused. He didn't speak at events unless asked. But his influence shaped everything behind the scenes. Systems changed when his name was attached. Boards paid attention. Executives didn't take shortcuts anymore. In one private meeting, an airline CEO asked him, "Why go this far? Why not just settle quietly and move on?" Elijah had answered with a single line, "Because the next Jasmine might not have me." Their son was born 2 weeks later, healthy, strong, curious eyes. Jasmine held him in her arms and whispered, "You don't know it yet, but you've already helped make the world a little safer." Outside the hospital window, the city moved like nothing had changed. But something had. One woman had stood up, quietly, firmly, with the world watching. One man had moved behind the curtain to force change with his signature and silence. Together, they'd done more than confront a racist incident. They had rewritten the rules. And now, passengers everywhere were finding their voices again. Because what started in seat 3A didn't stay there. It took flight. Some stories make the news, others make a difference. This one did both. Jasmine never asked for a spotlight. She asked for water. She asked for fairness. She asked to be treated like a human being. And for that, she was ignored, silenced, and struck. But she didn't break. And Elijah didn't storm in swinging. He didn't need to. Power, when it's rooted in purpose, moves without noise. Together, they turned humiliation into justice. They turned silence into a system change. This isn't just their victory, it's a signal. To every passenger who's ever been dismissed, overlooked, or told to sit down and be quiet, you're not invisible. You never were. And to every company, every boardroom, every uniform that hides bias behind a smile, your silence won't save you anymore. If this story moved you, share it. Let others hear it. Let it travel, just like Flight 218 did, but this time with truth at the controls. Drop a comment below. Have you ever witnessed injustice in public spaces? What would you have done in seat 3B or row 6 or watching from across the aisle? And if you're watching this from anywhere in the world, subscribe, not just for more stories, but because these stories matter. Because change isn't just possible, it's already in motion. One voice, one seat, one refusal to stay silent. That's how it begins.